Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're hopping around a bit on the calendar, same date, different year.
Oh yeah, sounds fun. What date are we talking about?
October 18th. It's amazing how much history happened on this one day.
Can't wait to dig in. What's first?
First up, we're rewinding all the way back to 1867 to talk about a deal that really reshaped the U.S. map. The Alaska Purchase.
Alaska? You mean that land up north with all the glaciers and national parks?
That's the one, except back then people didn't see it as a place for breathtaking scenery or anything.
Oh, right. It was a very different time back then.
Imagine this. The U.S. buys Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million, and everyone back then is calling it a huge mistake.
$7.2 million. For all of Alaska, that sounds like a steal.
I know, right? But back in 1867, that was a king's ransom. People called it Seward's Folly, after William Seward, the Secretary of State who pushed for the purchase.
I guess they didn't see the value of such a huge piece of land. What was Seward thinking?
Well, Seward was a visionary. He saw Alaska's strategic importance, its untapped resources, and being so close to Russia. He knew it had potential.
So he was playing the long game. But how do you convince a skeptical public to get on board with buying a frozen wasteland?
Exactly. And the public was very skeptical. Newspapers back then, they had a field day mocking the purchase. They called it a colossal blunder, a waste of taxpayer money.
People probably thought we were buying a giant ice cube.
It's funny how perceptions change, isn't it? What changed their minds? Was it the gold rush?
You got it. The Klondike Gold Rush in the late 1890s, just a few decades after the purchase, totally flipped the script on Alaska. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of that frozen wasteland.
It's incredible how the discovery of something like gold can completely reshape a region's image.
It's not just the gold. Later on, they found oil and other resources, which made Alaska even more valuable.
Talk about a turn of events. Seward's Folly turned into one of America's greatest deals.
It sure did. It just goes to show how much the perceived value of something can change over time. And speaking of things changing over time, ready for our next stop on this historical journey?
Absolutely, lead the way. From a frozen frontier to the airwaves, our next stop on this October 18th historical tour takes us to 1922, the birth of the BBC.
Ah, the BBC, a broadcasting legend. It's hard to imagine a world without it, isn't it?
It really is. Think about it. Almost every major event of the past century, the BBC has been there broadcasting it to the world.
True. Wars, moon landings, royal weddings, you name it, the BBC has covered it.
And they've had quite a few interesting stories of their own along the way, too. Like, did you know their first headquarters was rumored to be haunted?
Haunted. Now that's a story I need to hear more about.
I knew you'd appreciate that. It's Broadcasting House we're talking about, an iconic building with a somewhat spooky past.
Okay, spooky headquarters, give me the details.
So picture this. It's the early days of the BBC, and staff starts reporting all these strange goings-on.
Like what? Footsteps in the middle of the night? Voices on the airwaves when no one's around?
You're getting warmer. Phantom footsteps were definitely part of it. People claim to hear them echoing through the halls, especially late at night.
Ooh, creepy. I'd be spooked. What else?
There were whispers of disembodied voices, papers rustling in empty rooms, that kind of thing.
I guess when you're dealing with new technology like radio, it's easy to let your imagination run wild.
I know, right? But there's a slightly darker side to this story as well.
Don't leave me hanging. What happened?
The architect who designed Broadcasting House, a man named George Valmeyer, he met a tragic end shortly after the building was finished.
Tragic end? What do you mean?
He took his own life.
Oh, that's awful. It makes you wonder if the pressure of such a huge project got to him.
Perhaps. It's certainly a haunting reminder that even amidst the excitement of innovation and progress, there can be hidden struggles and tragedies.
Very true. It adds another layer to the BBC's story, that's for sure. But haunted headquarters aside, the BBC's early days were also shaped by some very real-world concerns. Didn't the government have a hand in its creation?
They did. Remember, this was post-World War I, and governments were keenly aware of the power of radio for propaganda.
Right. They couldn't risk having something so influential running completely unchecked.
Exactly. So they opted for a centralized, regulated system, which is how the BBC was born.
Makes sense. So from the very beginning, the BBC had this dual role to inform and also to some extent control the narrative.
Exactly. And that tension between providing information freely and serving as a tool of the state, well, it's something that has continued to shape the BBC throughout its history.
It's a reminder that even something as seemingly straightforward as broadcasting can be a complex mix of entertainment, information, and yes, even politics.
Well said. Now, are you ready for our final stop on this October 18th journey? Because we're diving into the world of literature with a story that's full of adventure, obsession, and a giant whale. From the airwaves, we're diving into the literary world, specifically October 18th, 1851.
Big day for bookworms everywhere. What happened then?
It's the day Herman Melville unleashed Moby Dick upon the world. Hard to imagine a time when it wasn't considered a classic.
Moby Dick, huh? I've always meant to read that one. I know it's about a whale and a captain and an obsession.
That's putting it mildly. But yeah, Ahab, the white whale, the whole shebang. But here's the kicker. When it first came out, it was a total flop.
You're kidding, but it's like required reading in some schools now.
I know, right? Talk about a glow up. Back then, it sold barely any copies. Can you imagine pouring your heart into a book and having it just sink like a stone?
Oof, yeah. That's got to be disheartening for an author. What went wrong? Were people just not ready for a novel about whaling?
It wasn't just the whaling, though Melville does go deep on that. It was a long, complex book full of symbolism and philosophy, not exactly light beach reading.
So ahead of its time, like people back then were expecting something more straightforward.
Exactly. The critics, they didn't know what to do with it. Some hated it, some were just baffled.
It makes you wonder how many other amazing books are out there, lost to time because they were too different for their own good.
Right. Luckily, Moby Dick got a second chance. In the 20th century, people started to appreciate it for the masterpiece it is.
Sometimes it takes a fresh perspective to recognize brilliance, kind of like how Alaska went from Seward's Folly to a treasure trove of resources.
Exactly. And the BBC, from this almost spooky experiment to this global broadcasting powerhouse, it just shows you how much things can change, how what seems insignificant one day can become iconic with time.
And how important it is to keep an open mind. Because you never know. The flop of today could be the treasure of tomorrow.
Well said. That's a wrap on our whirlwind tour of October 18th throughout history.
3 very different events, all leaving their mark on the world. Makes you wonder what connections we haven't even discovered yet.
That's the beauty of history, right? Always something more to uncover, always another layer to peel back. And who knows, maybe some of you listening will make those discoveries. Until next time, keep exploring. Smash that like button.
Please subscribe. Thanks for tuning in to
HistorianKid podcast channel.
Catchy. We hope you enjoyed this dive into history. If you did, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories from the past. Your support helps us bring history to life every day. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next episode. What lesser-known historical figures do you think deserve more attention? Get people talking in the comments.